In 1989, Pepsi Cola, the soda company, the people who make the drink that comes in a blue can, owned the sixth largest navy in the entire world. Not the sixth largest navy in their region. Not the sixth largest corporate security fleet. The sixth largest naval force on planet Earth. Bigger than most actual countries. Bigger than most actual governments. Bigger than most actual militaries. 17 submarines, a cruiser, a frigate, a destroyer. All traded to a soda company by the most powerful communist government in history in exchange for soft drink syrup. For a few weeks in 1989, Pepsi technically had enough firepower to declare war on a small country and win. This is not a movie plot. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is not something someone made up on the internet. This actually happened. And the story of how it happened is one of the most unbelievable true stories in the entire history of business, politics, and the Cold War. Welcome to the Hype Hunt. Let's hunt. To understand how Pepsi ended up with a navy, you need to understand the world they were operating in. The year is 1959. The Cold War is in full swing. The United States and the Soviet Union are locked in the most tense standoff in human history. Two superpowers, two ideologies, two completely separate worlds. American companies cannot operate in the USSR. Soviet citizens cannot buy American products. The Iron Curtain keeps everything and everyone completely separate. And then something extraordinary happens. The US and Soviet Union agree to a cultural exchange. America sets up an exhibition in Moscow showing Soviet citizens what life in America looks like. The latest technology, American fashion, American food, American culture. And right there at the exhibition, a Pepsi executive named Donald Kendall has one very specific mission. He wants Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev to drink a Pepsi. On camera, in public, in front of the entire world. Getting the leader of the Soviet Union to publicly endorse an American capitalist product during the height of the Cold War sounds completely impossible. But Kendall had a friend. That friend was Richard Nixon, at the time the Vice President of the United States, who was also attending the exhibition. Nixon guided Khrushchev toward the Pepsi booth, handed him a cup. Khrushchev drank it. The photo went around the world. And just like that, Pepsi had its foot in the door of the Soviet Union. But here's where the real problem started. The Soviet Union wanted Pepsi. Soviet citizens wanted Pepsi. The Soviet government was willing to make a deal. There was just one massive obstacle. Soviet money was worthless outside the USSR. The ruble, Soviet currency, could not be exchanged on international markets. American companies could not take rubles home and actually use them. They were literally just paper outside Soviet borders. So how do you sell Pepsi to 300 million Soviet citizens if they cannot pay you in any currency you can actually spend? You get creative. Very, very creative. In 1972, Pepsi became the first Western consumer product ever legally sold in the Soviet Union. This was historically massive. For the first time, Soviet citizens could walk into a store and buy an American-branded product. Pepsi had cracked the Iron Curtain. But the payment problem still existed. Rubles were worthless outside the USSR. Pepsi needed real, usable currency or something equivalent. So they struck one of the most creative deals in corporate history. Pepsi would supply syrup and equipment to the Soviet Union. In exchange, the Soviets would give Pepsi exclusive rights to export and sell Stolichnaya vodka in the United States. Syrup for vodka, cola for alcohol. Capitalism meets communism, and somehow both sides are happy. The deal worked brilliantly for years. Pepsi sold syrup to the Soviets. Soviets paid in vodka rights. Pepsi sold Stolichnaya across America. Everyone made money. And Pepsi's presence in the Soviet Union kept growing. By the 1990s, Pepsi had over 20 bottling plants operating inside the USSR. They were selling to hundreds of millions of Soviet consumers. It was one of the most successful international business arrangements of the entire Cold War era. But then came the late 1980s, and the Soviet Union started falling apart. The economy was collapsing. Political instability was everywhere. The whole system was cracking under its own weight. And right in the middle of all of this, Pepsi's existing deal with the Soviets expired. They needed to renegotiate. The Soviets still wanted Pepsi. They desperately wanted to keep the deal going. But there was a new problem. American tastes had shifted. Stolichnaya vodka sales in the US had slowed down significantly. The vodka side of the deal was not worth what it used to be. Pepsi needed a new form of payment. And the Soviet government, desperate to keep the deal alive, looked around at what they had available. They looked at their military. In 1989, Pepsi and the Soviet Union sat down to renegotiate their deal. The Soviets needed more syrup, Pepsi needed real payment, the vodka arrangement was not cutting it anymore, and then reportedly, a Soviet negotiator said something that made every Pepsi executive in the room go completely silent. What if we paid you in ships? Not metaphorical ships, not ship-themed merchandise. Actual military warships. The Soviet negotiators laid out the offer. 17 submarines, 1 cruiser, 1 frigate, 1 destroyer. A total fleet of 20 military vessels handed directly to Pepsi Cola in exchange for continued soft drink syrup supply. Now, Pepsi was obviously not going to start a military operation. They were not planning to invade anyone. They were a soda company. The plan was to sell the ships for scrap metal to a Norwegian company they already had a partnership with. But here's the thing. For the few weeks it took to arrange that sale, for the brief window between receiving the ships and completing the scrap deal, Pepsi Cola technically owned a navy that ranked 6th in the world by fleet size, bigger than the navies of most actual nations. And the Pepsi CEO at the time, Donald Kendall, the same man who got Khrushchev to drink Pepsi back in 1959, reportedly joked to a US government official, "We are disarming the Soviet Union faster than you are." Think about what this moment actually represents. A private American corporation, a company that makes a sugary carbonated drink, briefly held more naval power than almost every government on Earth. Not through war, not through politics, not through any complex military strategy, through syrup, sweet, caramel-colored carbonated syrup. That is the deal. That is the story. That is one of the most jaw-dropping transactions in the entire history of capitalism. But why did this actually happen? And what does it tell us about the world in 1989? On the surface, the Pepsi Navy story is just a wild, funny, completely unbelievable piece of history. And it absolutely is. But underneath it, there is something genuinely important happening. This deal was only possible because the Soviet Union was in total economic freefall. By 1989, the USSR was months away from complete collapse. The Berlin Wall fell that same year. The entire communist bloc was disintegrating in real time. And a government that once represented the most powerful military machine on Earth was so economically desperate that they were trading warships for soda syrup just to maintain a soft drink contract. Let that be your real measure of how far they had fallen. Not a political speech, not a history textbook, not a documentary about geopolitics. Submarines for Pepsi. That one sentence tells you everything about the state of the Soviet Union in 1989. And from Pepsi's side, this story is one of the greatest examples of brand power in corporate history. Pepsi did not conquer the Soviet Union with a billion-dollar advertising campaign. They did not flood the market with commercials and billboards. They got the leader of the USSR to smile and hold their product in one photograph. And they rode that single moment into one of the most profitable international deals of the Cold War era. The power of a brand, the power of one image, the power of one man handing a cup of soda to the right person at the right moment. 20 years later, that handshake turned into a navy. If that does not make you think differently about the power of marketing, nothing will. Let's land this. In 1959, a Pepsi executive got a Soviet leader to drink a soda. In 1972, that relationship turned into a cola for vodka trade deal. In 1989, that trade deal turned into 20 military warships. For a brief, glorious, completely insane moment in history, a soda company was a naval superpower. The ships got scrapped, the Soviet Union collapsed 2 years later, and Pepsi eventually lost its dominant position in Russia to Coca-Cola after the fall of communism opened the market. But the story lives forever, because it is the ultimate proof that in the right moment, with the right product and the right handshake, anything is possible. Even a soda company with a navy. Drop in the comments, what would you have done with 17 Soviet submarines? I genuinely want to know. Follow the Hype Hunt for more stories that sound completely fake, but are 100% real. See you in the next one.